She was holding a stranger's hand in the emergency room when her phone buzzed. She looked down. One name that made her blood run cold. The same name she whispered every night before she slept. The same name tattooed on her heart. Her husband's name. And it was coming from the patient lying right in front of her. Her fingers went numb. The phone slipped. She caught it just in time. She looked up at the woman on the bed. Beautiful, young, trembling in pain, and wearing a ring that looked almost exactly like hers. That was the night Sofia Rivera's entire world cracked open. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. 3 years earlier, Sofia had met Daniel Rivera at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago on a rainy Tuesday morning. She bumped into him near the counter, spilled his coffee all over his white shirt, and stammered apologies while he laughed. A real laugh, the kind that filled a room. Warm brown eyes, a dimple on his left cheek that only appeared when he smiled wide. He told her not to worry, bought her a coffee instead. They talked for 4 hours and missed their separate meetings without caring. "You're the most interesting disaster I've ever met," he told her, grinning. She laughed so hard her stomach hurt. He called her the next morning, and the morning after that. 6 months later. He was on one knee in that same coffee shop, asking her to be his wife. Sofia was a trauma nurse. She worked double shifts, held people together when they were falling apart, and came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. Daniel was an architect. He designed beautiful things, structures that stood tall and strong and lasted. He was warm, consistent, solid. He was her safe place. They built a life together in a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city. She grew potted herbs on the kitchen windowsill. He framed her nursing graduation photo and hung it above the fireplace. They cooked together on Sunday mornings, danced to old songs in the living room, and dreamed about a house with a backyard someday. Life was not perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was real and it was theirs. And Sofia loved every ordinary moment of it until the evening she found the boarding pass. It was a Thursday. Daniel had just returned from what he called a work trip to Miami. Sofia was doing laundry, reaching into the pockets of his gray jacket before tossing it into the wash. Her fingers closed around a folded piece of paper. A boarding pass. Chicago to Miami. That was right. Then she flipped it over. Miami to Houston. Return flight. Same weekend. He had called her from Miami twice. Texted her a photo of his hotel room. Said goodnight from Miami. He had not mentioned Houston. She stood in the laundry room for a long time holding that slip of paper, telling herself there was a reasonable explanation. She placed it back in his pocket. She did not say anything that night, but something had shifted inside her. Something quiet and cold, like a door she had not noticed before, now slightly open. Over the next 2 weeks, she noticed things she never had before. Daniel stepping outside to take phone calls he used to take in front of her. His laptop always closed when she walked past. And once, just once, he called her babe, when he had always called her Suf. Small things, tiny things. But they stacked up quietly, one on top of the other like stones. Then came the night shift that changed everything. It was a Friday, close to midnight. A new patient was wheeled in. Mid-30s, car accident, broken wrist, bruised ribs, minor head trauma, stable, but shaken. Sofia moved to her bedside immediately. "Hi, I'm Sofia. I'm your nurse tonight. Can you tell me your name?" The woman turned to look at her. Long dark hair, mascara smeared under her eyes. She was clutching her phone against her chest with her good hand. "Mara," she whispered. "Mara Collins." "Okay, Mara, you're safe." Sofia checked her vitals, adjusted her IV, and moved with practiced calm. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Mara's eyes filled with tears. She unlocked her phone with trembling fingers and held it out to Sofia. "Please, can you call him? His name is at the top of my contacts. He's the one I always call." Sofia took the phone gently. She looked at the screen, and the world stopped. Daniel, followed by a small red heart emoji. She stood completely still. Her own heartbeat was suddenly too loud in her ears. She looked at the name again, Daniel Red Heart. Her throat closed. "Miss." Mara's voice was soft, worried. "Are you okay?" Sofia forced air into her lungs. She set the phone down carefully on the bedside table. "I'll have someone else make that call for you," she said, her voice completely steady. "I'll be right back." She walked to the nurse's station. She sat down. She breathed. She stared at the wall for exactly 11 seconds. Then she stood up, asked her colleague Tanya to cover the patient in Bay 4, and walked to the break room. She was too emotional to call Daniel with Mara's phone. She called him with her own. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Saf, you okay? Isn't it late?" "It's a long shift." Her voice was completely normal. "Just checking in." "What are you doing?" "Just watching something on TV. Waiting for you." "Okay," she said. "I'll see you in the morning." She hung up. She sat in that break room for 6 minutes. Then she washed her face, fixed her expression, and went back to work. She finished the rest of her shift. She checked Mara's vitals twice more. She was professional and kind and gave nothing away. She did not sleep when she got home that morning. She lay beside Daniel while he breathed slowly in the dark, and she stared at the ceiling and thought about the red heart emoji on a stranger's phone. She waited and she watched. The following weekend, Daniel told her he had a site visit out of town. "Where?" she asked. "Casual, pouring coffee. Miami new residential project." She nodded and smiled. On Saturday morning, she kissed him goodbye at the door. Then she called her friend Grace, who worked in hospital admin. "I need your help with something," Sophia said. "And I need you not to ask me questions until I'm ready," Grace said. "Tell me what to do." By Saturday afternoon, Sophia sat down at Daniel's laptop, which she knew the password to because they had never had secrets before, and she found it. A second email account hidden in a browser tab he had minimized but not closed. She opened it with shaking hands. The emails went back 14 months. 14 months of messages between Daniel and a woman named Mara Collins. 14 months of "I miss you and I can't wait to see you and the kids were asking about you." But it was one sentence that split her open. "Tell me again that we're going to be a real family soon. I need to hear it, kids." Sophia read that word 3 times. Then she closed the laptop. She walked to the bathroom. She turned on the shower. She sat down on the floor of the bathtub in her clothes and let the water run cold, and she pressed her fist against her mouth. And she did not make a sound because Sofia Rivera had been trying to get pregnant for 2 years. 2 years of tracking cycles and temperature charts and fertility consultations and quiet heartbreak month after month. 2 years of Daniel holding her hand in waiting rooms saying, "We'll get there, Saf, we'll get there." And for 14 of those months, he had been living a double life. She gave herself exactly 20 minutes on that bathroom floor. Then she stood up, peeled off her wet clothes, changed, and called Grace. "I found what I needed," she said. "Now I need to find out how far this goes." Grace came over that evening. Within 2 hours, they had found it. A lease agreement in Daniel's name for an apartment in Houston, Texas. A lease that started 16 months ago. A lease that listed 2 dependents, 2 children, ages 4 and 2. Sophia looked at the screen for a long time. Then she looked up at Grace. "He has a whole family," she said. It came out very quiet. Grace reached across the table and took her hand. "I know. He was with her when I was having those fertility appointments. Sophia said he sat with me in those waiting rooms and he already had 2 babies with someone else." Grace didn't say anything. She just held her hand tighter. Then Sophia said something else quietly, almost to herself. "Leo is 4 years old." Grace looked at her. "Daniel and I have been together for 3.5 years, Sophia said. "He was already with her before me, before any of it." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not just betrayal, something colder, more complete. She hadn't been cheated on by a husband who strayed. She had been chosen as a cover story. Sophia straightened her shoulders. "I need to go to Houston," she said. They flew out the following Friday. The same weekend, Daniel told Sophia he had a conference in Las Vegas. They found the apartment building easily. Sophia sat in the rental car across the street and watched the entrance for 2 hours. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped out with 2 small children, a boy and a girl. The boy was maybe 4, wearing a red jacket and carrying a toy dinosaur. The girl was barely walking, toddling on round little legs, reaching up to hold her mother's hand. The mother was Mara Collins. Her face relaxed, her smile bright as she crouched down to help the little girl with her shoe. She kissed the top of both children's heads. She laughed at something the boy said. She looked like someone who believed she was loved. Sophia watched from across the street. She felt something she had not expected, not rage toward Mara, something closer to grief. Because looking at that woman, at those children, Sophia understood that Mara was also a victim. She did not know. She could not know. Otherwise, she would not have handed a hospital nurse her phone with Daniel's name on it without hesitation. This was all Daniel. Sophia turned to Grace. "I've seen enough." On the flight home, she did not cry. She looked out the window at the clouds below and thought very carefully. She was a trauma nurse. She had learned early in her career that the worst thing you could do in a crisis was panic. You assessed. You made a plan. You acted with precision. She was going to handle this with precision. Back home, she made 3 phone calls. The first was to her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Harriet. The second was to her HR department to request a schedule change. The third was to Mara Collins. The phone rang 4 times before Mara picked up. "Hello." "Hi," Sophia said calmly. "My name is Sophia Rivera. You might not remember me. I was your nurse at Chicago General Hospital 2 weeks ago." A pause. "Yes, I remember you. You were so kind. I'm calling because I have some information that I think you deserve to hear, and I'm going to ask you to hear me out completely before you say anything." Silence. Then very quietly, Mara said, "Okay." Sophia spoke for 11 minutes. She told her everything. The boarding pass, the email account, the lease. The children's ages matched against the timeline. A timeline that started before Sophia had ever existed in Daniel's life. She spoke steadily, without cruelty, without drama, just fact after fact, like reading a patient's chart. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mara said, "What is his wife's name?" "Sophia," she said. "That's me." Another silence, longer this time. Then Mara said, "He told me he was going to leave her, that it was already over between them." She paused. Mara's voice, when it came again, was barely above a whisper. "My children, his children. I know. What do we do?" Mara asked. "I have a lawyer," Sophia said. "A very good one. And I want to make sure that whatever happens next, you and your children are protected. That's why I called you first." When Daniel came home that Sunday evening, tanned from what she now knew was not Houston, he set down his bag, kissed Sophia on the cheek, and asked if she was hungry. "I made pasta," she said. He smiled. "You're the best." She watched him pour himself a glass of water and talk about his drive from the airport and ask about her week. And she thought about how good he was at this, how seamlessly he moved between 2 lives, 2 women, 2 versions of himself. He had been doing it for years. 2 days later, she was gone. She had arranged it carefully. Her nursing licenses, her financial records, her grandmother's jewelry, her potted herbs from the kitchen windowsill. She left one thing behind, the boarding pass she had found in his pocket 2 months earlier. She placed it on his pillow. Beneath it, her wedding ring, and beneath that, a single note card in her very neat handwriting, "I know everything." She did not wait to see his reaction. She did not need to. Harriet had already filed the papers. The marriage was fraudulent from its foundation, built on lies that predated their first date. Harriet had also connected Mara with a family law attorney specializing in paternity, child support, and civil fraud. Between the 2 of them, they were building an airtight case. Daniel called Sophia 47 times in 2 days. She did not answer. On the 48th call, she picked up Saf. Please, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, Daniel. I have documentation. My lawyer has documentation, and so Snorts does the attorney representing Mara Collins and your 2 children." Absolute silence. "I want you to understand something," Sophia said, her voice calm and clear. "This is not revenge. This is consequence. There is a difference." She hung up. Daniel drove to Houston that same night. He showed up at Mara's door with 40 red roses, and the expression of a man who still believed he could talk his way out of anything. Mara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply sat across from him, hands folded, and waited while he collapsed to his knees on her floor, roses in hand, begging through ugly tears. "Please, Mara, please, I love you. I love the children." She let him finish. Then she told him quietly that her attorney had already filed for formal paternity and child support, that the money his lifestyle had drained from her father's fortune was being pursued through civil fraud, and that he would see his children on a schedule, a judge, determined. Not him. He wept harder. She stood, smoothed her skirt, walked to the door. "You had everything," she said simply. "You chose this." The roses stayed on the table. He did not. His business partner, Marcus, found the financial irregularities during divorce disclosure, redirected funds, double-billed clients, 8 years of partnership, late nights, shared victories, everything they had built. And Marcus changed his number without a single goodbye. He bought Daniel out at half the firm's value. Daniel had no choice but to sign. Then the industry found out. In architecture, reputation is everything. And his was gone overnight. Contracts canceled. Clients demanded audits. His name once on award short lists now only came up as a warning. He ended up in a one-bedroom rental alone. No firm, no family, no one to perform for. He sat on the bare floor one night, legal papers scattered around him, and picked up his phone, scrolled through every name. Nobody left. Sophia gone. Mara gone. Marcus gone. Even his mother had said, "I raised you better than this, Daniel," and gone quiet in a way that cut deeper than any courtroom. He thought about Leo and Penny, the red jacket, the toy dinosaur, the little girl toddling on round legs, reaching up for her mother's hand, children who called him daddy, children who deserved better. He thought about Sophia in those fertility waiting rooms, her hand in his, trusting him completely. While the whole time another life, his real first life was already in motion somewhere else. His chest caved. And there, in that silence, with no one left to perform for, Daniel Rivera pressed his face into his hands and wept. Finally, completely, and far too late. He had built two lives simultaneously and believed he was untouchable. He was wrong about everything. The women he had underestimated had simply told the truth, and the truth had been enough. The divorce was finalized in 8 months. Sophia received her fair share of their shared assets and walked away with her name, her career, and her dignity completely intact. She also walked away with something unexpected, a friendship. Mara had reached out 3 months after that first phone call, not to rehash the pain, not to compare notes on Daniel, but simply to say, "I don't have many people here who understand what this was, and I think you might be the only person who truly does." They met for coffee on a Tuesday. The irony was not lost on Sophia. They sat across from each other, two women who had loved the same wrong man, and talked for 3 hours. Not about him, about themselves, about Mara's children, Leo and Penny, who were funny and chaotic, and the reason Mara got out of bed every morning. About Sophia's nursing career, which she had poured herself back into, with a focus that surprised even her, about the strange specific grief of losing a future you had completely believed in. 4 months after love found Sophia the same way, trouble once had quietly on a Tuesday over coffee. He was sitting 2 tables away reading something on his phone, a cup of tea going cold beside him. He had a quiet kind of presence, the sort of man who took up space without demanding it. He looked up and their eyes met for just a second. He smiled, small, unhurried, and looked back down. She might have thought nothing of it, but when she stood to leave and accidentally knocked her bag off the back of her chair, scattering her keys and her pen and her little notebook across the floor, he was already crouching down to help before she could even apologize. "I've got it," he said gently. Their hands reached for the notebook at the same time, their fingers brushed. She looked up at him. Up close, he had kind eyes, dark and steady, and a little warm. "Thank you," she said. "Of course." He handed everything back to her, unhurried. "I hope your day gets easier from here." It was such a simple thing to say, but the way he said it, like he meant it, like he actually hoped that for her, stayed with her all the way home. She went back the following Tuesday. She told herself it was just coffee. He was already there. Same table, same cold tea. He looked up, smiled, and pulled out the chair across from her before she could decide whether to sit. "You left so fast last week, I never got your name. I'm Paul. Can I join you?" Sophia laughed. First time in a long time. His name was Paul Warren, a reconstructive surgeon. He volunteered at the hospital on weekends. And there was a gentleness in the way he talked about his patients, not pity, genuine care, the kind that comes from a person who chose this work and would choose it again. He called her on a Thursday evening. His voice was unhurried, warm, with a steady attention she had not felt in a long time. They talked for 2 hours. He told her about growing up in Cincinnati with a twin sister named Pauline, his other half, he called her, who had gone into medicine the same year he did, and spent the last 12 years becoming one of the best reproductive specialists in the country. He told her why he chose reconstructive surgery, about restoring what had been taken in ways both physical and deeply personal. She told him about her nursing career, the double shifts, the weight of holding people together in their worst moments. She told him about Chicago in the rain, about potted herbs on windowsills. She did not tell him about Daniel, not yet, but by the time she hung up, something in her chest felt warmer than it had in a very long time. They met 3 weeks later. A quiet restaurant, candlelight, no pressure, the kind of evening that asked nothing of you but your honest company. He stood when she walked in, not out of courtesy, but the way people stand when someone they have been looking forward to finally arrives. He smiled at her like she was someone worth smiling at. 4 hours passed like nothing. He slid the entire chocolate cake to her side of the table without making a thing of it. He listened when she spoke. He laughed at her stories in a way that made her want to tell him more. And when she finally carefully told him something of what she had been through, he didn't rush to fill the silence. He just looked at her and said quietly, "I'm sorry that happened to you. You didn't deserve any of it." Simple, clear, honest. She felt something shift inside her. Not the sharp, sudden falling she had once associated with love, something slower and more certain, like foundations settling into solid ground. He walked her to her car. The city was quiet around them, streetlights soft on wet pavement. "I'd like to do this again," he said, "if you're open to it." She looked at him for a moment, at the steadiness of his face, the patience in his eyes. A man who was not trying to convince her of anything, who was simply standing there and asking, honestly. "I'm open to it," she said. He smiled, and then gently with a question in his eyes first. He leaned down and kissed her softly on the cheek. She smiled the whole drive home. They took it slowly. She watched how Paul moved through the world, how he kept his word in the smallest things, the unremarkable things nobody would notice if he skipped them. He never skipped them. He remembered exactly how she took her coffee. He showed up at her work with an umbrella on a day she had only mentioned in passing that the forecast looked bad. He called when he said he would call. He was always where he said he would be. She kissed him for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in her kitchen. While he was laughing at something she said about her herbs, it surprised them both. She pulled back. They looked at each other slow and a little stunned, and then he kissed him. His hand came up gently to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek, and she leaned into him, into the warmth of someone who had never once asked her to be less than herself. It felt like being found. 6 months later, on a quiet Sunday evening, Paul asked her to marry him. No grand gesture, no restaurant full of strangers watching, just the two of them on the couch. A film neither of them was watching anymore. He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a ring. Simple, beautiful, a single stone that caught the light like it had been waiting. "I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life," he said softly. "I want to be the person who hands you coffee exactly the way you like it every morning. I want to grow old with you and laugh about everything and be the safest place you've ever had." He searched her eyes. "You've been through enough storms, Sophia. I just want to be your home." Her eyes filled. "Yes," she whispered. "Obviously, yes." He slid the ring on and laughed, soft and relieved and completely undone. And she grabbed his face in both hands and kissed him long and certain. While the film played on unwatched and the city hummed outside, and everything felt for the first time in a very long time exactly right. They were married 4 months later. Small, intimate. Grace stood beside Sophia in pale yellow. Beside Paul stood Pauline, his twin sister, his other half, the person who had known him longest and loved him most, already dabbing her eyes before the ceremony had even begun. Sophia wore her grandmother's earrings. She carried white flowers. She walked toward Paul, unhurried and sure of every step. When she reached him, he looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was someone worth looking at, and said quietly, "Just for her, you are so beautiful." She laughed through sudden tears. He took her hands, and in front of the small circle of people who had loved them through the hardest years of their lives, they made their promises. Simple, clear, permanent. There was only one thing that remained. The thing Sophia had tucked quietly into a place she rarely visited. The dream of a child. She told Paul honestly. The 2 years of trying, the appointments, the tests, the quiet grief of month after month. Paul listened, took her hand. He did not say, "We'll figure it out," the way Daniel always had. He said, "That sounds exhausting and heartbreaking, and I'm glad you told me. Whatever the future looks like, I'm here for all of it." She loved him a little more for that. What she did not know was that Pauline had already quietly asked if Sophia would come in, not as a patient, just to talk. Pauline reviewed everything, every test, every cycle, every treatment Sophia had ever had. She asked questions no previous doctor had thought to ask. When the results came back, she sat down with Sophia and spoke gently. "Your body wasn't broken," she said. "It was protecting itself." Sophia's immune system had been quietly working against her all along, treating a potential pregnancy like a threat, attacking it before it could settle. On top of that, low-grade inflammation in her uterus, slightly low progesterone that no routine scan would catch. Individually, each one was easy to miss. Together, they had been enough to tip the balance month after month toward loss. "None of this was your failure," Pauline said. "You were carrying too much for too long. Your body knew it even when you didn't." Sophia pressed her lips together, nodded slowly. The plan was straightforward. Medication to calm the immune response, hormone support at the right window, and above all, stability, rest, the kind of peace Sophia was only now beginning to allow herself. No VF, no procedures, just her body finally given the conditions it had always needed. Sophia said yes. 3 months into Pauline's protocol, on an ordinary Thursday morning, Sophia stood in her bathroom with a test in her hand. She had done this too many times. She knew that particular silence, the 2 minutes that felt like standing at the edge of something with no idea how far the drop was. She had learned not to hope too loudly. She looked down, positive. She read it again. Her hands were completely still. The word didn't move. It just sat there, quiet and certain. The most important word she had ever read in her life. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the bathroom floor. The same floor where she had once wept into her fist, alone and broken, and trying not to make a sound. She sat there now with the test cradled in both hands. She looked up at the ceiling. She breathed and she let herself cry. Not from pain, from something so much bigger than pain. From the sheer, staggering relief of a dream that had refused to die, finally quietly coming true. She stood, wiped her face, and walked out into the hallway where Paul was leaning against the wall, watching her the way he always watched her, like her expression was the most important thing in the room. She held up the test. He crossed the hallway in 2 steps and pulled her into him. Just held her, his face pressed against the top of her head. She could feel him breathing. She could feel what this moment meant to him. She held on tight. "Hi," she whispered into his shoulder. "Hi," he whispered back. His voice broke on that one small word. His arms tightened around her, and for a long time, neither of them moved. The first ultrasound was at 8 weeks. Sophia on the table, Paul beside her, Pauline at the screen. The room was quiet. The image came into focus. Pauline went very still. Then she turned around slowly, caught somewhere between professional composure and absolute joy. "Sophia," she said softly, "I need to show you something." Not 1 heartbeat, 2 twins. Paul made a sound that was not quite a word. He reached for Sophia's hand and held it against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat fast and overwhelmed and entirely real. He was crying quietly, completely, with no attempt to hide it. She thought about the bathroom floor, the waiting rooms, Daniel holding her hand in those waiting rooms while his other children were already learning to walk. She thought about Pauline's words. Your body was not broken. It was responding to everything it had been through. She had believed for so long that something was wrong with her, that she was not enough. She had simply been in the wrong life. The babies were born on a bright October morning. Luna Warren came first, quiet and wide-eyed, blinking at the world like she was already paying careful attention to everything. Luke Warren came 2 minutes later, small and fierce, his grip on Sophia's finger so tight that the delivery nurse laughed through her own tears. Paul held Sophia's hand through every contraction, his forehead pressed to her temple, whispering steadily, "You're doing so well. I've got you. I'm right here." When Luna's first cry filled the room, his breath shattered. When Luke was placed on Sophia's chest, Paul bent down and pressed his lips to her hair and stayed there, shaking slightly, undone in the most complete and beautiful way a person can be undone. He cupped her face in both hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely holding. "For being you, for finding me, for all of it." She turned her face into his palm. "You found me too," she said. He kissed her then, soft and long and full of everything. The waiting, the hoping, the Sunday kitchen, the ring on her finger. Every morning she had woken up next to someone who was exactly who he said he was. Grace arrived 2 hours later with the most chaotic flower arrangement anyone had ever seen. She took one look at the 2 small faces, sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed, and said nothing for a full minute. Then she said, "Sophia Rivera." "Sophia Warren now," Sophia said. Grace laughed long and real, the kind of laugh that only comes after a very long journey. Mara sent white roses and a card that said simply, "You were always going to get here." I knew it. Leo and Penny sent kisses. Sophia read it twice. Then she set it carefully on the windowsill beside the 2 small baskets, where Luna and Luke slept side by side, breathing in the same slow rhythm, their tiny fists curled against their cheeks. She looked at Paul asleep in the chair beside her, still wearing his hospital wristband. She looked at her children, Luna, Luke. She thought about the woman who had stood in a laundry room 3 years ago, with a boarding pass in her hand and a cold feeling in her chest she had not yet allowed herself to name. That woman had been brave when she was terrified. She had refused to crumble. She had walked into the hardest rooms and come out the other side, not bitter, but clearer, not broken, but rebuilt. She had earned every single thing in this room. Paul stirred, his eyes opened. He looked at her first, always her first, then at the babies, and his face broke into the kind of smile that comes from somewhere so deep it needs no thought. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," she said back. He reached over and took her hand, laced his fingers through hers, and squeezed once gently that small, wordless language they had built together. "I see you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She squeezed back. Outside, Chicago stretched wide and bright under an October sky. The city where she had learned what love was not. And here, in this quiet room with her baby sleeping and her husband's hand warm in hers, she was living proof of what it truly was. Steady, patient, real, and absolutely completely worth the wait. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart race.